Well, hey B, welcome to I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist, a podcast.
A podcast.
A podcast, yeah. Because I don't know if you've noticed, that's actually what's on the stuff that we're selling on Redbubble to try and recoup the costs of the podcast. But really, look, let's face it, it's not really about that. It's about just having a bit of fun and getting some T-shirts and stickers and mugs and stuff.
And I like our logo. It's very simple. It stands out, and I would wear it. You can see that through our Facebook page. Get on there, click the link, or just Google it.
Yeah, and we came up with that together. That was actually a genuine joint effort, wasn't it?
It was. It was Creative Design Studio 101.
Yeah, of which I am none of that, by the way. So
no, I like mucking around with graphics and stuff, and I'm not very good at it. But anyway, we enjoyed it. Again, lots of stuff happening on the Facebook page, lots of conversations over the last week, a lot of people talking about tongues. And people talking about their experience of tongues. We encourage you to just get on, keep talking about any of the topics that are coming up. Get on our Twitter, retweet us, have a conversation with us on there. Just talk, and talk to each other. As we've said before, just because we don't engage in the conversation on particular topics doesn't mean we agree or don't agree with it. It just means that we're not engaging on that because we're both pretty busy too. We've both got full-time jobs and families and lots happening, and it's not all about us. Even though it's us talking here, it's about you guys all talking to each other and having a look back on the past, contextualising it in the now and what you've learned, I guess.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a community. That's what I like as well. People are starting to get to know one another, and it's nice. It's nice.
We did have Anthony Vet Brown, who was our guest in episodes 11, 12 and 13, I think it was. Anthony messaged us and said, you guys have now got a ministry.
Yes.
Anthony.
Yeah, that didn't trigger me at all, Anthony. Thank you very much.
But no, I certainly know what you mean. There's a bunch of people who are talking and a bunch of people who are part of an online community, which is a great thing.
Yeah, which is very good. So, hey, episode 17.
Yes.
The flip side. Last week we did tongues. This is the flip side of that. Prophecy.
It is prophecy. And, prophecy was, as I said in my conversion story, prophecy was always something that I looked at secular prophets a lot growing up, and I was always fascinated by it, the ability for someone to see into the other world and be able to predict things and be able to, create that mystery. It was always something I found really interesting. So coming into the Christian world and being told, you too can do this, I was like, wow, I can do this. This is actually part of the Christian journey. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought so too. I remember Pastor H, the senior pastor of Great Big AOG, he was part of the state executive, he was part of the national executive. He was a big deal. And so anything he said, we paid attention. And he was talking once about how the prophets spoke in two ways. He said the prophets spoke with foretelling, that is telling the future and what was going to happen. But then he said they also spoke with forthtelling. And I have no idea what that means.
No,
even to this day.
I think it's just before fifth telling.
Oh, I think so. And just after third telling as well. And if I have to tell you again, that'll be the last time.
Okay.
I think he meant that it was, speaking on behalf of God, speaking from God rather than, just telling the future. And let's face it, that's what happens a lot in prophecy in the Bible anyway. It's not always, talking about end times or talking about the destruction of the Jewish temple or the nation state or anything like that. Sometimes it's just, this is what God wants from you. This is what he wants you to do. So prophecy was like that as well. Let's face it, it wasn't just telling us, what was going to happen in the future, but the future was a big part of it.
It was a big part. And, I'm sure that you have examples, as do I, of people who would seek out prophecy because they want to be guided. They want to know that they're heading in the right direction. And one that certainly comes to mind for me is somebody that got a prophecy not long after they became a Christian that said essentially all the things that they really wanted. Like at this time, they were maybe I don't know, maybe early 20s, 22, 23, and it was very much you're going to have a wife, you're going to have a beautiful big house by the beach. This person was a surfer. You're going to have a beautiful family, blah, blah, blah. They hung their hat on it, but it also seemed to grow this prophecy. They started to interpret it that essentially they would have lots of money, they would have this and that and that, and they used it, I think, as an excuse sometimes to seek something greater, seek something better. And they now are maybe 40 years on and haven't landed any of that and are quite lonely. They're in that space where they are heading towards the latter part of their life completely alone because they actually hung their hat on this, created a new story for their life that wasn't necessarily true, and missed out on all the good things around them.
A couple of things stand out to me about that. First of all, it sounds very word of faith, blab it and grab it kind of thing. Like it was all very material possessions kind of stuff. It was all very much in that. But the second thing is it sounds like this person didn't do anything to try to achieve any of those things. They just expected God was just going to deliver because it was a prophecy.
100%. That's exactly what happened. And the interesting thing is, this person is of very low motivation, so I think it suited them to sit back and just expect it to come. But others that I spoke to over the years around who were there that day that apparently this prophecy was passed said that's not what was said at all. How it was interpreted that way, people didn't quite understand. I can't remember exactly what they said it was, but it was very much just a word of encouragement they framed as, which was, good things are going to come to you. And they interpreted it as those good things that they actually wanted to come to them. So it was, it's quite sad when I look back at it.
So you think it was maybe one of those more sort of general prophecies, those ones that are a bit like a star sign in the newspaper, God's going to do this, God's going to do that. And then this person actually gave it legs or fleshed it out and made it more specific than it actually was.
I think so. And over the years too, they kept seeking out. They would go to different evangelists or meetings that would happen and where somebody had this gift of prophecy and they would seek out, they would go up the front for prayer at the end of a service to try and get further guidance on it. And some of that, I think, was to try and, for them, it was just to cement the fact they were on the right path, regardless of the fact that anybody could see that they were on the wrong path and they were doing nothing to actually contribute to this vision, this prophecy.
That's interesting. But, I can totally relate on a lot of levels to that story, though, in my own experience, because I used to love getting prophecies. Whether it was a word of wisdom, word of knowledge, word of whatever the other words are, I used to love them. And it was one thing to get a word from your mate or from someone, your peer in the church, but it was another to get it from the visiting minister or the pastor or whatever, when they would actually start to prophesy over you. It was, wow, because it was like God is speaking directly to you.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember many times when people would bring a word to me, or whether it was a prophecy or not, and it was, God is going to do great things in your life. God is going to use you in X, Y, and Z way. And if somebody was sitting next to me and just said, mate, I think you're doing a cracking job at life, things are going well for you, you'd go, oh, thanks, that's lovely. But when you frame it and say, hey, this is a message from God, exactly the same thing, but it's from God, of course, it holds that greater importance.
Well, that speaks to the culture of the AOG and Pentecostalism. And look, not just in Australia, but globally, I think at the time, it was all about God's going to use you. God's going to make you into this, and God's going to use you, and you're going to do big things for God. Remember that? That was the thing that was said all the time. God, you're going to do big things for God. Whereas in the Revival Centre, we didn't have personal prophecy. They didn't believe in it. Okay. It was all, tongues, interpretation, and then prophecy, which was just in the service. Someone could shout out, and it was always in Elizabethan English. Verily, verily, I say unto you this day, the Lord doth, it was like that, which we had a bit of that in Great Big AOG as well, but not as much. But, there was a bit of it, but it was more this personal prophecy where people would come up to you either in the prayer line, or maybe they'd be praying for you at home and come and see you at the service or whatever, and say, hey, God gave me a word for you. Yeah.
How often was that used? God gave me a word for you
Oh,
all the time.
every fucking week.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And I think sometimes, it was used as a mechanism of control when sometimes you would get it from others.
No.
Never.
What? No. How very dare you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
totally. And I'm going to confess that I used it for evil, not always for good. So there was a couple who were friends of mine. Well, actually, the guy was more my friend than the girl, and I wasn't a big fan of her. She didn't do anything. It was just, we were young, and you sometimes don't like people. And she's a wonderful person. I wanted to stress that because I know that she may be listening to this, and she was a wonderful person, right? But I wasn't keen on my mate marrying her.
Yeah.
And I really thought, right, he was making a bad call marrying this girl. It was all too quick. He was just running right into it, And so I started to, I don't think it was quite as clear as saying I made a conscious decision to give them a word. I was believing that the marriage was wrong. And then one day I went up to him and I said, hey, I think I've got a word for you. And he's like, okay. And I said, I think that you're making a mistake. I didn't say I think.
No,
I said, I've got a word for you. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's make that clear. And I said to him, you're making a mistake marrying this girl. That if you do, God will bless you. It'll be okay. But you'll miss out on the real call of God in your life.
Yep.
If you marry this girl. And they were at Bible college with me at the time. He went back and told her, as you can imagine, she wasn't happy.
I don't know why.
Yeah, and I think they literally got in the car and left Bible college early, went back to Great Big AOG and reported me for having given this word. Because if you think about it, from their perspective, what if it was God?
Yep.
That's going to throw all their marriage plans and their love for each other and, they were beside themselves, especially her.
So were you charged with spiritual misconduct?
Well, yes and no. So there was one pastor in particular, let's call him Pastor J, who he was happy as a pig in shit when he found out that this is what had happened. Because he was, I don't know if you remember, Pastor J used to give words all the time.
All the time.
All the time. And he actually, I remember him looking at me and smiling with this smarmy smile and said, what have you done now? And I was like, huh, what? And then, but the other pastor, Pastor B, he actually called me in and said, do you really believe it was God? Yeah. And I was like, well, I think so. And he said, well, let's face it, if you throw a stone into a herd of pigs, the one that squeals is the one you've hit. And so privately, he said to me, maybe you're right. And maybe that's why they're so upset. And I kind of got away with it. But years later, looking back, shameful, really wrong. Because I just don't think it was God, but more than that, it wasn't my place to be giving people prophecies about their marriage.
Well, and 30 years on, roundabout, they're still married.
Exactly right. And my Christian marriage didn't last.
No.
But to be fair, I had a lot of people giving me words about that one. I should have listened. But that's just a prime example of using it to manipulate. I had a desire. I had what I wanted. I had convinced myself that it was God and, made a mess of someone's day.
Yeah, and look, I don't think I ever used it to purposely manipulate from memory, but I certainly remember this one time we were on a camp, the old Christian camp again, where we were, talking about using the gifts of the Spirit. And it was this one night we had someone speak on prophecy, and it was told to us at the end, now go and practice it. Just go up, deliver a prophecy to someone. How incredibly irresponsible that was. A bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Hey, go and speak into someone's life and tell them it's God. That put a lot of pressure. And I was a leader at this time, I think it was just before I was going to Bible college. So definitely had aspirations. And I remember going up to this one guy and giving him a word, giving him a prophecy. And It was incredibly general, but it was also based on stuff I knew about him. It was also based on the fact that, it was some basic psychology. This person had, you could see a bit of social awkwardness, a bit of difficult relating to people. So I used that in ways of going, hey, God sees that sometimes it's really difficult for you to engage with people because of X and Y and Z. He wants to tell you to just be bold, go out, have, rest in him, all this sort of stuff. I can't remember the exact words.
Yeah,
but
well, I know the guy you're talking about because he was so socially awkward. He was basically inside out. So
Yes.
giving that word was like saying, the Lord would say the sky is blue.
The sky is blue, and you're right. It was that generalised stuff, but I felt such a pressure to do it, and it was never a gift that I thought I had or wanted, but there was a lot of pressure. Just go and do it. Just go and give it a crack. What could go wrong? You could just speak into someone's life and completely fuck it up if they hung their hat on it, and like this person I spoke about before. It was just incredibly irresponsible.
But it happens outside of Christianity, right? I mean, certainly the Baptists and Church of Christ and people would say, no, it's not something we do. But outside of Pentecostalism, there is, similar kind of thing, right? It's fortune tellers and people doing cold readings and hearing from the dead and, speaking to you. And there's been a lot of, there's been a lot written on it being actually a skill of cold reading, reading people, watching their responses, continuing to speak, start to go down a wrong track. You could see it in their face. So you turn back and change the story and on you go. And very much like the astrology stuff we see in the newspaper.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people have made careers out of that. Jonathan Edwards crossing over. A lot of people swear by the fact that he can actually speak to your dead relatives or friends and pass on messages. Maybe he can. I really don't know. But yeah, I think it is that generalised stuff, and definitely a little bit dodgy in some ways. But it's not something that I believe is real. Personally, but I think a lot of people do hang their hat on it and wait for his words.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant about being really hungry for it as a young Christian. Being able to hear that God was actually speaking to you. But you're right; it was always very general. God's going to use you for big things, and God's going to do this, and it was never on Thursday the 15th of April 1994 you're going to stub your toe. It was never that.
No, I remember several of my siblings used to regularly visit. I've spoke before that we used to have the old family seances, but they used to quite often visit local fortune tellers or witches or whatever you want to call them to go there to hear about their future. And I remember once one of them coming home saying, oh my God, they've told me that mum and dad are going to get divorced. And at the time, I was only 8 or 9 or 10. I was quite young. And I remember being incredibly distressed by it because I saw that stuff was quite real back then. Bit of a spoiler, mum and dad were married 57 years before dad passed, so they didn't break up. It didn't come true, but we definitely hung our hat on that, the authority, I guess, that these people had in being able to tell the future.
I can remember there was a youth meeting once, and there was a girl who was sort of sliding away a little bit from church, right? And she stopped attending and was coming sometimes, and Pastor Jay, one of the youth pastors, got up and actually spoke into her life.
Yeah.
It says you're drifting and you're this and you're that, and just really laid it out, and she was in tears. And then later I went to her and said, I told him all that, right? I'd gone and seen him earlier in the week and said I was worried about you. She got so upset and so incensed, she walked out and never came back.
Wow. It's pretty full on. I think stuff like that happened quite often. It was a bit frightening, but one lighter-hearted thing that did happen, and you reminded me of this because I had completely forgotten, as I'm sure that I've forgotten many, many different things, but there was one person in a prayer meeting where they had been spoken, they were getting words spoken to them, and this one person was prophesying over them, saying, God's given you a trumpet, sound your trumpet, sound your trumpet. And, it got a bit awkward in this meeting, and all of a sudden the person literally put their hands up to their mouth and went, they literally sounded their little fake trumpet.
Sounded their trumpet. They didn't realise it was a metaphor. Yeah.
They did not.
Yeah.
And, good on them. Lucky it wasn't a kazoo, because they can be a little bit annoying.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you another one, like I did with the tongue story, right? This is one that I can't explain.
Yeah.
So there was this young guy in the youth group who was sort of on the fringe. And I, you were talking about just, practicing prophecy, right? So I was trying to practice prophecy one day. So I sat there with him, we were praying. There was a group of us, and I laid hands on him, and I just started prophesying. And I just wanted to say stuff that was really positive, and I was basically imitating everything that I'd heard other people say, right? Yeah. So I was saying things like, you're going to, lead many to the Lord, and God's going to use you for big things, and I went on for quite a long time. And as I was going, kid you not, all of a sudden I stopped, and it was as if something took over, and out of my mouth came these words: "This shall not come to pass." And I just froze.
Yeah.
And everybody looked at me. I didn't know what to say. And it was as if I was bullshitting, and then something stepped in and went, actually, none of that's real. Boom. And I can't explain that to this day.
You called yourself out.
A part of my subconscious said, actually, no, I don't know. But there you go. True story.
Do you remember a great big AOG? There was a bit of a fringe group, and certainly a group that you related to, and you started a bit of a prayer group. Do you remember that one with that fringe group? And I don't know if you remember it, Edward, but it was there
was a lot of fringe groups and a lot of prayer groups. So go on, and
I do remember.
It stands out to me.
And I remember I wasn't there, you were relaying this story to me at that time. And this person was in the corner, and you opened your eyes, and they were dancing and moving and not saying anything, but a lot of movement. And you went over to them after a few minutes and said, "Are you okay? What are you doing?" They said, "Hey, I'm experimenting with prayer." And,
yes.
You do remember?
That wasn't fringe. That was mainstream. I mean, his I was experimenting with prayer was not mainstream, but I think that's the kind of shit that happened all the time, man.
Yeah, it did, but it was a bit weird. It was like experimenting with prayer, like experimenting with prophecy, but slightly less dangerous. So it is a bit of a weird time. The whole prophesying thing, it's a bit strange. To this day, I'm not convinced of many things I'd seen or heard, and I don't recall any that I remember hanging my hat on for my own life, and certainly none that have come to pass to date. So that generalised stuff, all of that can come to pass.
I had one once that was, God's going to make you a man after God's own heart.
Oh, yeah.
And that one stuck with me for a long time, because that sounded like a nice thing to happen.
Yeah, okay.
And I used to often revisit that one, that God was going to make. It wasn't about God's going to make you do great things, or he's going to use you and, you're going to save millions, and none of that. It was just, you're going to be a better person. And I kind of liked that one. I thought that was good. And sometimes they would be encouraging. Sometimes they were kind of nice, and people would say encouraging, we call them a word of encouragement, brother, which is not one of the words, but not one of the biblical words. But I actually, I like those, man. And I kind of look at it now, and I can remember one of the other podcasts that I was listening to. Again, it was the liturgists, when they did one on prophecy, and again, worth investigating that podcast series. But they were talking about, is it possible that some people do tap into something? Yeah. Like that there's, something that we can't explain. It doesn't have to be spiritual. But like when the phone rings and you know who it is, and you pick up the phone and it's them.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know that stuff? Or, that I've had a mystical experience in my life, which sort of put an end to my atheism. I'm not going to go into details, but I had a mystical experience where I knew stuff that I couldn't possibly know.
Yep.
And can't explain it to this day, and it doesn't mean Christianity is true. It doesn't mean that there's ghosts and goblins. I'm not saying, but it doesn't mean it's not either. But definitely I don't know, man, there's something sometimes that I feel I can tap into and know stuff. And now you can mock me, but seriously, man, and I don't think it's necessarily just the domain of Christians. I think other people get this as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm not going to mock you because, I've had similar sort of mystical experiences and I've had some things that are quite unexplainable happen in my life. So I'm very comfortable with that in not knowing and never knowing what they will be quite potentially. But, some of those, I think you're right, some of those words of encouragement, those type of prophecies were good and they were a safer place and they're an encouraging space. And if they built people up without being damaging, then I think that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think we should do that as fellow humans, build each other up anyway. But when you start badging it as God is telling me this and this is how I can control you, that's where it becomes dangerous and not a helpful space to move in.
Yeah. I think if, the Chinese have this thing about Chairman Mao, they say he was 70% right, 30% wrong. I think in this domain, both in church and outside of church, I think it's like, 3% true and 97% shit. But that's just how I feel. I think that there is something, probably going to alienate half the audience by saying this, but I do. That's where I live.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people will chase that 3%. A lot of people will chase it if it's a fraction of a percent, just on the off chance that they might hit some gold. That's what we do. I think it's part of human nature as well.
Yeah, that's right. We're meaning makers, aren't we? It could all be subconscious. It could all be unconscious. It could all just be bullshit. I get that. And so please don't listen to this and go, oh, I'm not listening to I was a teenage fundamentalist anymore because they're, super spiros, as we used to say back in the day. Remember that, super spiros. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's things that sometimes happen that you just can't explain. And I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah. And we don't have to. I've got friends that are hardcore science heads and everything has to be explained away by science, otherwise it's not true. And I think it's just as dangerous to be on that side because not everything is explainable and there's too many things that we don't know. And I think it can be a bit of arrogance on our behalf to think that we can explain everything. I don't think life that works that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a place for science and it's extremely important. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have podcasts and, and iPhones and medicine and all that kind of stuff 100%. But I think there's, and this is coming back to that, that small percentage of experiences and things that happen that you just go, can't explain that. And yet it happened. And you can't measure it because it's experience, right? It's been, it's gone. But it's still true. It still really happened.
It is, and your truth might not be my truth, and that's okay. Let's be okay with that.
Yeah, that sounds like a song. Your truth might not be my truth. His truth is not her truth.
It's like a postmodern anthem. I like it. I mean, it's a little bit naff, but I like it. I think also we've got, 2 more episodes before our last episode. So it's probably good to give people a heads up that what we want to do in episode 20 is have a bit of a Q&A. We've had a few people that have contacted us and asked questions. We also had somebody put on the Facebook group, would we like to do like a live stream and have questions? Just what we're going to do is get you to start popping questions up. We might put like a notice board up on the Facebook page or whatever that people can populate with some of the questions they want us to speak to. We're going to have a little bit of a retrospective time as well and look back on the season as it was, but also, any of those things that you want to ask us, we're going to be more than happy to answer, I'm sure.
Yeah. So we'll start a thread is what we'll do in the chat, in the group, and you can just pop your questions in or you can send them to us. And let us know whether you want us to say your name, like, Fred from Drysdale, or whatever. And then, we'll read the question out. And I think that'll be good. I think it's interesting too. I don't know if you've gone back and had a listen to our first few episodes where we've got dogs running around and shit quality microphones and stuff. I think we've come a long way in these almost 20 episodes.
Yeah, it's certainly been a learning curve. And I think as we listen to other podcasts too, get some tips and tricks on how to tighten it up a bit and I think it's we've got a relatively unique flavour, which I'm enjoying. Comfortable with where we're heading with it. We'll see what happens in season 2, but we've still got 3 more episodes before that happens.
Yeah, cool. All right, mate. Well, that was brilliant. I'll see you next week, eh?
Sounds good. See you then.